what you desire.
It's also really cool. Alright, that's enough of an intro. So some notes about the actual sword in terms of dimensions. You have a blade at 30 3/4 inches long, basically, without the Habaki, which is another inch or so. So you almost have a 32-inch blade if you go from tip to tsuba, but that's not really how Japanese swords are measured. So anyway, you can see that there. The handle is 11 1/4 inches long, which is pretty surprising given that the Nakago, a lot of times there's a couple extra inches of a handle, and the Nakago is about 11 inches long, so there's not really a lot of wiggle room in there. The Nakago goes all the way down, and it gives the blade actually an interesting sense of balance. And when I say interesting, I mean actually pretty nice, but I'll get to that part later. The Saki Haba, Saki Kasane, Moto Kasane, Moto Haba, basically these are just measurements of thickness and width of the blade. Now the blade should be noted that it's a pretty thick blade, and it's not terribly wide, but it's on the wide side. It should be because of its size, but it's also not really enormous. It's just on the bigger side of katana. The sori is about 1 inch, which is not very big considering how large this particular sword is. It wouldn't be weird to have almost 1.5 inches or maybe even almost 2-inch sori. It'd give it a lot bigger, deeper shape, but it has a pretty straight shape almost for its size. In terms of the weight, there's some interesting bits to note about this. The sword is 3 pounds 5 ounces, full, basically as you see it in this little photo here. If I take just the naked blade and remove the ska and the handle and just measure the blade itself, you're at 2 pounds 7 ounces. The tsuba is actually pretty heavy, and so I mean it's no terrible surprise that you're adding about 1 pound there to have a handle and a tsuba on it. But the point of balance is 6.5 inches up the sword, and when I combine point of balance at 6.5 inches up the sword, as well as a sword that's 3 pounds 5 ounces, that makes me think that it's going to be a club-like object, and it's anything but. I mean, 3 pounds 5 ounces is not the heaviest blade. Sometimes they teeter a little closer to 4 pounds or a little over on the really heavy side, but this is a big sword, and it's in the big sword category of weight. Also, 6.5 inches up the blade in terms of a point of balance is pretty high up there. It's not uncommonly high, especially for a sword of its size, though I guess I'm saying that without a lot of statistical references to cite, but it doesn't seem weird for a sword this size. But usually, 6 to 4 inches up the blade is kind of where the point of balance is. 6.5 or 7 is a little less common, at least in my experience. Now that said, the more I learn about swords, or rather I should say the more I handle them, I don't know that I'm learning anymore, but the less I think the point of balance really gives you any idea how it should feel. Because if I was thinking about these measurements, 3.5 power, 3 pounds 5 ounces, and a 6.5 inch point of balance, I would think that thing must move like a club, and it doesn't. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a big sword, it feels like a big girl, but for the size that it is, it's actually surprisingly nimble. I've had swords that were 1 pound less and felt more dead and less nimble in my hand. So I wish there was a better way for me to describe how it moves in my hand or how it feels, but I guess you're gonna have to take my word for it that she's real nice. I don't know, maybe I'll swing it around in this video and you'll see. So let's get into the katana part itself. What you can see is, some ito and some gloss cyan, some pretty cool stuff, and I'm gonna go into all of the parts as I normally do in detail. So let's start with the Fuchi Kashira. These are Shibuichi Fuchi Kashira made by Josiah Boomershine. Shibuichi is a combination, I believe, of silver and copper, and when it's patinated and comes out, it can look like this. This particular mixture, or percentage, or alloy, or however it's made, came out with a nice kind of, it looks black in some lights and a dull gray or dull green in other lights. In the video here, you're seeing it in sunlight, and it really goes well with everything. I mean, how it works with the ito, it blends well in some lights and other lights that kind of have a little bit more contrast, but I'm actually really happy with how everything thematically kind of blends with one another. The transitions, as you can see here, the Fuchi and how it lines up with the Habaki, and how well the colors kind of match together, how well the Fuchi matches with the Koiguchi, the Koiguchi, the mouth of the saya. Everything, it comes out as you would expect in a custom sword. The Fuchi Kashira are really reflective. You can kind of see the Mitsudome has a little reflection there, and I think they all come together really well, and just this gray-green ito that you see here just goes really, really well with it. I'm glad I didn't go with a different color. I had to kind of be pressed into doing this one, and I think it was I respect that advice because it came out looking awesome. There's a full wrap of black Samegawa or lacquered black Samegawa underneath, and Samegawa, when it's got a full wrap on it, it provides some additional structural integrity in the handle itself. There are menuki on here also made by Josiah Boomershine. I should point out they are made in Shibuichi, but they were made at a different time, and he was able to actually match the look, which is kind of a trick if you don't work with the materials all the time. A lot of variables going in making that alloy and getting the patina to come out right. So the fact that he was able to match it after making it years later is pretty cool, and a tip of my hat to him. Anyway, they're made in the swirly Mitsudome fashion that I put on everything, and I'm super happy with how they came out. The tsuba was purchased from Nihontofrance.com. They say it's a late Edo period piece. I honestly don't know if that's the case or not, but they're a reputable dealer, so I don't know that I have any cause to really doubt that. But I didn't really buy it because it was an antique. I bought it because it's got swirly Mitsudomes all over it, and that worked really well with the piece I have. And I'm actually really surprised at how well it matches the Shibuichi piece. The patina on it, especially in the sunlight here, they kind of both have this dark kind of brownish color. And that's great. They don't always kind of have the same match. The sunlight really changes the Shibuichi up a little bit. The tsuba can have a darker brown color, and the Shibuichi pieces can look black sometimes. But on any note, I'm really happy with how it came out. They look beautiful together, and all those swirly Mitsudomes everywhere sure do look cool. Let's talk about the saya. So first of all, it's a gloss black, and it has some abalone in the lacquer. I'll show you some detail of that up in just a minute. It's got a horn Koiguchi, Koijiri, and Kurikata on it, and you can see that the Koiguchi, or the mouth opening here, is exactly, I guess, how it's supposed to look, and it holds the sword as you would expect in the saya. It doesn't fall out, and it's properly measured and done. The saya itself, overall, it looks really great, and it matches really well, and it's cool, and it's subtle, but it has some character in it. I'm very pleased with how it turned out. The Samegawa that you're noticing towards the Koiguchi, or towards the opening of the saya, that's like about an 8-inch or 6-inch, I can't remember how long, wrap of Samegawa. But the trick is that, unlike mini swords, this is just sanded down a little bit, so it still has a very textural sensation when you hold it. It helps you grip the saya a little bit more. It obscures fingerprints and stuff like that as well, despite it being glossy. And in addition to that, it's harder to cut through in case you do that. The abalone crystals in the saya have a nice kind of different reflectory properties, so sometimes you just see a gloss black saya in some lights, but in others you get these little speckles of green and purple and pink and blue, and they're a little heavier towards the end, or the Koijiri end of the saya, but man, they just look so cool. And you can see some of them in this video here, that it just adds just a little bit of zazz to the project. Okay, we can chat about the Habaki now. The Habaki is a new silver Habaki with a scratch pattern in it, or rain pattern, but it's not quite a rain pattern. I'm not sure what a pattern you would exactly call this. Also, silver seppa go on it, so there's 2 silver seppa made out of solid silver, and then the Habaki. I'm really happy with how the Habaki came out. Glad I went with silver instead of with copper. I think it really complements the Shibuichi and the blade a bit better than copper would have. Overall, though, it's a really well done piece, something that's often not really thought of, and that's why it's tough for me to ever put brass Habakis on anything, because so many production swords come with them. But the silver Habaki has a little bit of detail, and it's got a nice pattern, and it's cool as hell. The blade itself, the pointy stabby part that everyone's interested in, is also made by Josiah Boomershine. I believe it's made out of 1075 steel, and I noted the dimensions earlier on, but in this part I'm just going to say that, wow. Just wow, the hamon on this blade, the activity is just stunning to behold. There's so much character and so much to see in the sword that it's I don't know, it kind of, as I'm going through this and watching it always gives me something new to look at and makes me stumble a little bit with what to say, other than she looks so pretty. I wonder why my camera is wiggling all over the place. Anyway, the main point about the sword and blade and all of this is that it looks pretty. It stands out in this sunlight area here. My big fat butt is kind of blocking it, but you can still even make out the hamon in some of the worst lighting conditions. It stands out in such a way that is really easy to appreciate. So if you hold it up and you're You're looking at the blade. There's just so much to see and so much activity. And even though it's not a folded blade, there's just a lot of different characteristics in the hamon that you know, keep you entertained for a long time if steel is your thing. Josiah did a great job on this sword, and it's interesting because the hamon kind of reminds me of Rick Barrett, who Josiah studied under for a while, but is also not something that I would attribute to. It's got his own unique flair and style, and it's nice to see something that I can say like, oh, that kind of looks like what Rick would do, but it's not. It's uniquely Josiah's. So that's a fun thing for me to say, because it's something I noticed. And it's always nice when you notice things and feel like you're learning. And I'm often proven that I'm not learning, but in this case, I think it's a unique or interesting observation to make. Perhaps not unique at all, but interesting nonetheless. So the rest of the sword. This video almost seems like it's on repeat. I was going back and forth with my camera quite a bit here, but suffice to say, the blade is just absolutely stunning to look at. There's a lot to see. The hamon is pretty high up there, so it rides right along kind of the shinogi G, and it's mostly hamon. She's a lot of hamon in this blade. It's a big, thick blade too, so I don't know exactly how property-wise that might affect performance or not, but it's not uncharacteristic in historic blades to see something like that either. Just a lot of antique examples and polished down so much that there's not really a lot of hamon left. The Kisaki, as you can see here, is also really well defined. Very pleased with how it came out. I'm not sure exactly what Kisaki you would call it other than Shinogi Zakuri, but I don't know if it's a Chu or just the standard sized Kisaki. But overall, how it looks, how the burnishing took place on the polish, everything about it is very, very nice, and it kind of looks mean too. You know, you wouldn't want that pointed at your face, but that's what you're supposed to do. Anyway, the main point is Kisaki came out really beautiful. I'm super happy with the sword, and I will try to maybe get to swinging it around now. I am actually going to go outside now and move the sword around, and I want you to keep in mind that these are really my initial impressions on the sword. I have not taken it really out of my office and doing some basic handling and looking and picture taking. I haven't swung it around a lot, and this is the first time I'm going to do any kind of drawing with it. I'm not going to do any cutting, but any kind of drawing. This is really the first time I've done it, and I'm going to try and articulate my thoughts to you as I go through it. Now, the first thing I want you to note is that everything feels good. It doesn't fall out of the saya. It doesn't do anything wrong or bad. It feels good in my hand. The ito feels nice. I feel the kind of textural sensation of the Samegawa wrapped around the mouth or the Koiguchi area of the sword, and it doesn't fall out. Everything seems to fit as you would expect from a custom sword. The other thing I'm going to note is the feeling of the sword, and that's perhaps the most important. How does it feel? How does it move in my hand? And the first sensation that I feel is really just its scale and size. It's important for you to frame up and understand where my perspective is coming from, and that is, one, admittedly as a novice martial artist, and two, from a taller guy using a 29-inch blade, and this being pretty close to a 31-inch blade. Those extra 2 inches might not sound like a lot, but they really add up to be a lot when you're basically a person of my size using a 29-inch blade is allowed to cheat themselves quite a bit. I don't have to do sayabiki. I don't have to separate the saya from the sword as much as shorter people do that use the same size sword. So this extra 2 inches is really kind of forcing me to stretch my arms to where they're supposed to be, and to separate the saya from the blade in a way that I'm often instructed to do, but when I start moving at pace or when I start practicing myself, that there's no size limitation forcing me to do that activity correctly. This begins to make me do that correctly forcibly, otherwise the blade just isn't going to be drawing properly. So that's one thing to note. It's bigger than I'm used to, and it's forcing me to overcome a hurdle that I'm not used to having to jump over. The other thing I'm going to note in terms of its size isn't just how it draws, but how it feels. It feels like a kind of a purpose-built cutter. It feels like it has a lot of momentum and mass, but it feels controllable at the same time. I don't really feel like it's difficult to get moving, though as I watch this video and I see myself in motion, it feels like I'm almost kind of lurching forward as I try to gain tip speed. And I do recall a sensation of kind of tension in my wrist to stop the blade or change its direction that I didn't normally feel, or that I don't normally feel when I use smaller or lighter swords. So this blade really forces me to pay attention to, one, how I'm moving and actually practice and do the martial arts that I study correctly. And two, it really makes me have to think about the pressure I put on, how fast I move things, because I can't just rely on the fact that I'm a big fat guy to start and stop the blade. It has more mass, and I definitely feel like I have to actually think about what I'm doing with it more than I do other swords. That said, for a blade of its size, it's definitely a big blade, no question about that. You don't often find swords in the close to 31-inch blade length. A lot of them are 26, 27, 28, 29 inches. This is definitely among the bigger ones. And in terms of weight, it's a pretty beefy sword. It's not light, but it shouldn't really come as any crazy surprise that it isn't terribly light, because it's a much larger sword than you commonly find. So it's not fair to compare it to swords that are 2 to 4 inches smaller. That said, you feel the mass, but it feels like somebody thought about it. It's amazing how balanced a sword can feel when somebody is, making it that knows what they're doing. And this definitely feels like that. I mean, Josiah did a fantastic job on the blade. It feels amazing in my hand. It feels like a big sword. I'm not making any false appraisals or praise here. It feels like a big sword, but it feels really fantastic for its size. Anyway, that is kind of my general feeling on the blade. Overall, I am just thrilled with this project. I think it came out just wonderfully. It's one of the swords that it makes me think I should perhaps try and actually keep it, because its size forces me to actually think about what I'm doing. I don't know if I'm going to. I'll probably try and sell it, frankly, but I'm not going to be too disappointed if I'm forced to hang on to this one. It's a really beautiful sword. It's covered in swirly mitsudomes, which I love. It feels really awesome in my hand. It seems like it would be great for Toyama Ryu. It's got a size that, as a student, kind of forces me to get better than I am. And none of those things are really bad. It's really an amazing feeling sword. And on top of that, just overall the coolness. I should really, as I think about it, Josiah made the sword himself, which, as a forge, how do I articulate my thoughts here in a way that human beings can understand them? A lot of times a craftsman is really skilled at one thing. You don't necessarily expect somebody that knows how to forge a sword and heat treat it and make a really solid blade. You don't expect them to be good at so many other things. And that's really where Josiah, he is. Now, Josiah forged the blade, he heat treated it, he also did the polish, and it's fucking beautiful. It's gorgeous. I'm almost tempted to never cut anything with it because it's so pretty. But it definitely wants to cut things. It feels like it would be a great cutter, but it's also a work of art. Additionally, Josiah made the Fuchi Kashira and the menuki, and the Shibuichi, just, even though they're really simple, just solid, easygoing, clean, beautiful lines in a material that you don't see. The color has depth. It's really pretty. It's really a beautiful sword. Then the overall mount, I had the sword mounted up in a way that I think is gorgeous. The little alabaster or abalone, not alabaster, abalone, I believe, crystals, they kind of freckle in the sun a little bit. It adds a little bit of texture. The feeling of Samegawa in my hand, as I reach for the side. Just a lot of little things about this sword make it a really pleasant experience to use, really beneficial from a learning perspective, and just really pretty to look at, even if you're not swinging it around. So hopefully that articulates my thoughts. I know it's a run-on sentence there, but anyway, that's really all I have for you. It's a wonderful sword. I'm really, really happy with it. I hope that maybe it gives you some ideas for projects that you might have for the swords you want to make, and gives you some idea of maybe Josiah's capabilities beyond the other project sword that I showed you from him before. But just, that's really all I have for you. I hope you enjoyed. I hope it's been helpful or at least entertaining. And as always, cheers and thanks for watching.